Okay, alright, we're going to start.
So we're going to start this tonight. Tonight's presentation is by Fraser, aka Nulltown. He's going to be presenting on biohacking. He's been with Irvine Underground since the start of it all. Everybody, welcome Nulltown. Exactly, since he was at least 12 years old.
Yeah, all true. Alright, so, biotech isn't something that a lot of computer hackers think about. Very few do, but there are a few people from one discipline who end up in the other, and the cross-section is quite interesting, and I'll talk a little bit about that later in the section. But definition of biohacking from Wikipedia is practice of engaging biology with a hacker ethic, which is kind of vague, but I'll get into that. So this is just bio thing, it's not really biohacking. Hacking encompasses a lot of things, like especially microbiology, sometimes medicine, environmental science, biostatistics, a lot of bioethics issues, and there's regulation like FDA and USDA, and it's a very complex ecosystem involved in like biotech, and biotech kind of came out of pharma, but now it's becoming to the point where bacteria are like computers and you can program them as such, be little chemical factories, and there are a lot of interesting applications for all sorts of things, from biofuels to plastics or new types of body armor that's made from like spider silk. It's like 10 times stronger than steel, but really lightweight. It's pretty interesting. It's kind of like nanotech too, but it's technically biotech. So back to the hacker ethic, because that's part of the definition of biohacking. What is the hacker ethic? Many definitions, not everyone agrees, but there's some things people can agree on. Free information, improving society and life, open and free access. There's the whole white hat versus black hat thing, and gray hat, and there's, sources of stability in the community like the EFF, open source movement, Wikipedia. Hacker ethic involves sharing information and certain counterculture ideals, just like we're doing with the internet. And it's a meritocracy, and we inherently mistrust authority and promote decentralization. Those are central parts of the hacker ethic that cross over between biohacking, or what some people actually refer to as the biopunk movement, or DIY bio. There's various names for it, but essentially citizen science and biotech, which is a quite controversial area of research that hasn't amounted to much other than some neat science fair style stuff. But it's beyond a typical science fair. So what is biohacking? Some of it is very clinical and kind of like artists do it. Like one guy planted a magnet, so he has like a sixth sense. It's considered wearable tech or Google Glass biohacking in a way, because it's enhancing the human experience, technology, even if not implanted. Some people are biohacking themselves for behaviorally or with diet. This is the Quantified Self community, which came out of Wired magazine. It's all about health and measuring various things, like measuring your brain waves while meditating, or doing yoga, measuring your heart rate, exercising, measuring your exercise in a day, what you eat. So a lot of people are athletic, and it's all about health. And biohacking, a lot of it, they won't call it biohacking, but it's done at universities, companies, or government labs. And it's expensive, and it's usually for some noble cause like curing a disease or making some new chemical with synthetic biology, or it could be dangerous, like U.S. military's research and defensive and offensive biohacking. Biohacking mean anything else? Sure, it could be considered reverse engineering biology, which has been happening for a long time. thousands of years, arguably. Humans have some element of the hacker ethic and hacker archetype within them naturally, and just because one lacks computer skills, it's not exempt from all of the elements of the hacker mindset. So, naturally, the hacker phenomenon is not, it's not required. Computers and the internet. And, but biotech now has a lot of similarities to computers. Other examples of biohacking, nootropics, people who take medicines or dietary supplements that enhance their cognitive ability. Quantified self, like I said, biometric data plus interventions and experiments. They call N of 1 because it's just a scientific cell, it's an antidote. The whole transhumanist movement, techno-progressivism, essentially people that are like one cyborgs. That's very fringe, I don't really know anyone who into that, but technically biohacking could be considered that. And then there's stuff like at-home gene sequencing, DIY genetic kits for schools and young kids. These exist. Essentially mail-order kitchen biotech kits that are designed to be harmless, fun and educational, like make bacteria glow or grow some mushrooms, really simple stuff. So who are biohackers? There's the life extension people, a lot of people in Bay Area, venture capitalists, Ray Kurzweil, they're all about life extension. They want to eventually grow organs and live past 100 and do all sorts of stuff. There's DIY bio people, there's the whole biopunk movement, which also extends into science fiction, but the biopunk movement is hard to describe exactly what it means. I think it's kind of a media term that just came out, but DIY bio makes more sense. Hobbyists, most of the people are hobbyists, some are artists, curious people, futurists, and then again, the majority of biohacking, if you use the term definition loosely, is in academia and industry, and they're very serious, they're experts, they're well paid, and they get things done. And then there's normal people making beer, yogurt, growing vegetables. Arguably, there's biohacking involved in at least 2 out of 3 of those. A lot of people hack biology, find a profit, save the world, take over the world, cure disease, other altruistic stuff, other evil stuff, and the God complex, or ethics. Seriously, so, first do no harm, it's a medical thing, it's a big deal, to the extent it's synthetic biology, even when not clinical. Topics related to synthetic biology, it's very complicated. Bioethics have been a lot of meetings at governments and universities coming up with proposals and guidelines that are now in place. But topics include containment and safety, clinical research requirements, what that would look like, which has not happened yet, intellectual property and funding, which is not government, but it's the overall economy around synthetic biology, which is referred to as synbio for people that are lazy. Dual use technology, just like computers. You could use it for good, you could use it for bad. Export restrictions, DNA printing restrictions, because DNA printing is, someone could DNA print the virus of like smallpox or 1918 flu. Because they're available online, for whatever reason, they got posted the whole sequence, and the DNA printing companies, they look for that, they look for even snippets of that, so people can do nefarious things, but that's only after FBI and Department of Homeland Security had outreach programs and created requirements of these DNA printing companies to be vigilant. And there's some paranoia about biowarfare, almost the level of Cold War and nuclear warfare, because they are weapons of mass destruction.
So what about the flu that keeps on, like, every year we get the different flus out there that everybody seems to get hit by? Is that all man-made, or is that just, what is
Unfortunately,
that?
the flu vaccine only works like 25 to 30% of the time because they have to predict the strain of flu, and it's really usually wrong. But the flu viruses that are out there are pretty benign. I mean, some people have a bad proud of it, but when I say flu of 1918, that's the one that killed 100 million people, and that's a conservative estimate, and yeah.
I remember like SARS, like when the SARS outbreak happened, like I worked for a ventilation company, and like we were working around the clock just churning out vents for China. Like they literally said, no matter how many you make, we will buy them all. You know, I'm like, I mean, there's a lot of talk that like something like that. I mean, like that's like a global economy changing.
Yeah, biosecurity definitely affects the economy in the on the microeconomic scale and macro. For sure, that it's all connected. You know, that's why I mentioned venture capital. Even though it's totally something you wouldn't think about when you think about biohacking or biotech.
Yeah, I mean, like you looking to like just dump somebody's economy into the toilet. It's like that's a pretty good way to go about it. It's just like
I could have given a talk on economic warfare, but I chose biohacking because it's more.
We're not all into economic warfare.
Economic warfare is pretty cool. Anyway, I'll have time for Q&A. Dangers and potentials. So, you know, smallpox and like I said, they're both they're available for download. DNA printing is cheaper and cheaper. DNA is about $1 per base pair. Base pair being A, T, C, and G. And now it costs about $1,000 to decode your entire genome. Where services like 23andMe, they test your genome for maybe 400 or so SNP, stands for single nucleotide polymorphism, which is like one mutation, and it figures out like what your status is on that one mutation. Clear and present danger with biotech, bioweapons, mass production toxins, botulism toxins, increased chance of accidental and natural pandemics because you know, governments are working with this. It's not just the U.S., China, Iran, Russia. Many countries have bioweapon programs, and you know, each bioweapon program and with deployment of bioweapons, there's an increased chance of accident and natural pandemics could occur from a variety of reasons, usually climate change and habitat stress. Low barrier to entry for bioterror and bioweapons. They're much more likely to be the roads to terrorist groups than any other weapon of destruction. This is a fact. It's taking time. Genetic printing is getting cheaper and better, faster than Moore's Law. In fact, it's quite incredible how synthetic biology is really turning out to be like the new computer. There's a bad history of evil biotech. I'm just going to go into it because it's cautionary tale. Infamous actually, Japanese Unit 731, known to the public as Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department, which is very misleading because they were poisoning, around 10,000 civilians and died. They were poisoning many people, and that's only what they know of. The Japanese destroyed records, research, and the weapons themselves incredibly efficiently. The U.S. government was shocked, but we did give the amnesty to some of the Japanese scientists that have been working for us. The Russians, however, captured Japanese scientists and held them to trial and executed them because the Japanese ruled Japan over like 15 years, experimented mostly on Chinese, but also on Russians, 100,000 maybe, perhaps millions of Chinese were affected. They were worse than the Nazis in some way. I mean, the Nazis killed more people, but these people did more cool medical research like vivisection, cutting people alive, infecting them with things, or Hitler did that too, but they're both bad. It's just a lot of people don't realize how Japan was definitely committing genocide of sorts. And 40 years actually is how long their bioweapon program existed until the end of World War II. And notorious for war crimes. Even in Singapore, it was just awful human testing, and it was really one of the darkest points of humanity in the 20s. They did plague, cholera, hemorrhagic fever, What's interesting is that there were 1,700 Japanese soldiers killed and 10,000 fallen ill through their bioweapon exercises just for this Unit 731, which means that, you know, nation states or terrorists that use bioweapons, they're risking their lives, and it's very messy, it's very dangerous, and very bad. You know, no estimate is provided of Chinese and Russian deaths. The Department of Justice does not publicly keep track or release body counts of, I meant to say Iraqi body counts. I said they only keep track of, anyway, they only publicly keep track of Iraqis. They don't keep track of Iraqis, obviously. It's just whatever. There's actually an example of local bioterrorism that has some link to Orange County. Indian guru named Rajneesh, was big in the 60s, 70s, 80s. Let it cold for a while in Laguna Canyon. They moved to Oregon. At their peak, they bought a huge plot of land, but the Oregon zoning laws allowed not many people to live there, and they really wanted like a city with thousands of people because this guy had a lot of followers. This guy would get like Europeans and he would get people that were to donate all their money, and some of them had like family money, and the guy had like almost 100 Rolls Royces, and it was really bizarre. But basically, he was eventually implicated in bioterrorism plots in the late 1980s. Not necessarily him, but his second in command, it was a doctor, made thousands of people sick by spreading lab-cultured salmonella in salad bars and grocery stores. And they also used botulism, but no one died, thankfully. People were hospitalized with dysentery. What's interesting is causing symptoms like flu or dysentery is enough for a bioweapon to be like an incapacitating agent versus a lethal agent. The potential benefits of synthetic bio is cheaper, better, safer medicines, materials, energy could be made with new bulletproof vests or some stuff to replace metal for airplanes and stuff. It's really lightweight and strong. Energy, feedstocks are like sugar. It's really easy. These bioreactors, the programming of bacteria so far has been quite easy. This alone covers a lot of ground in economics and potential benefits. There's also stuff like could help with clean water, definitely help with better food. There's stuff like Monsanto, of course, drought-resistant crops, ecologically sustainable systems, state ecology can help with all that. They'll be decentralized and hacker ethic, like DIY and hacker ethic, decentralization, distrust and authority. There'll be small and cheap bioreactors in the home or a community lab that can make beer or medicines, chemical materials, but hopefully people won't use it to make evil stuff like pathogens. Imagine it to be like a science fiction type university constructor, but it's limited because you mail order bacteria that have a metabolic pathway, and they have something like, you give it like sugar, and then you give it like a few proteins that are like on and off switches for safety, so it won't like go into the wild because they can't find these things in the wild. And all these bioengineers are very careful. So the government's actually been promoting them quite well, working with the community versus opposed to it at all.
So with the drought-resistant crops, how does that work?
Drought-resistant crops is a Monsanto product, and actually it's kind of controversial. Sometimes they don't work, but Monsanto claims they work, and they do it for cotton.
Is that a company or is that?
Monsanto is a big company that partners with about 10 other companies, like Dow Chemical and BNSF and some biotech companies, some pharma companies. But Monsanto is a huge company that consolidates all that product and markets it to farmers.
So what happens when there's a drought? Does the product stop producing, and then when the water comes, it continues?
Drought-resistant crops are just more likely to survive the drought, and then come back to life and still produce food, I'm assuming. However, there's an anecdote of the water table dropping from 40 feet, I guess below sea level or something, to 240 feet within one season, maybe 1 year. community of farmers that were growing cotton, and they switched that year. They switched to the drought-resistant seeds. So the drought-resistant seeds actually sucked up way more water, and all their cotton crop failed. So the drought resistance did not work at all. It was like the opposite effect. And in India, for whatever reason, legally, the debt is forgiven if the head of the household commits suicide. So there was a mass suicide of about 1,000 villagers that had taken out loans of like only $100 or something for these Monsanto seeds and fertilizer. It was in the news, like.
It makes me want to go out there and be like, I will forgive your debt. Here's $100.
Yeah, there's microfinance, but unfortunately, microfinance is a bit corrupt. They make good returns. They double their money or more. You know? So microfinance is a good intention, it's a good idea, but unfortunately, there's like just like every nonprofit, there's some level of corruption, or at least, you know, they charge some middleman type fee. Just gonna sit down, just.
Thank you for explaining that.
So, potential benefits of synthetic biology. I think I covered all of this, yes. What is synthetic biology? Design, construction of biological devices, organisms really, and systems, organisms for useful purposes. But they're treating it like engineers. So, bioengineering, designing bacteria, computers, or as computers. DNA being programming language. They're also chemical factories. They use sugar and other cheap feedstocks. And there's so much potential from biofuels to, botulism toxins, Botox. There hasn't been too much in the media. Most of it's business news, some social commentary, some science news, Wired magazine, but the most information can be found on the search engine PubMed.gov, which a lot of the journals you need university library access to read. But basically, this is where all the scientists who study biology and even physics and everything publish stuff, and it's a big search engine. And, if you're interested in it, you kind of have to venture into the academic realm because you won't find too much in the media about it other than the cursory stuff I'm talking about here, which is the potential and the risks. Brief history of biohacking and medicine, because they kind of go hand in hand in some ways. Before Alexander, biohacking and medicine were essentially the same thing. Meds were crude and brutal until the mid-1800s, when things like antiseptics were around and anesthesia. This is largely irrelevant to biology, in fact, completely irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. But it shows you how far medicine technology has evolved and just printed. There's a lot of misinformation, superstition, plant-based therapies that did work, but harmful therapies like bloodletting. Medicine was really, really bad until, 1850, 1900s and beyond. Scientific method really helped. And then for synthetic biology, it really all started in 1978 with the discovery of recombinant DNA and PCR, DNA amplification technology, which is genetic engineering, two foundational patents, and that's how Genentech started. It's a big deal. So, biotech of the 1900s, biotech and pharma, antibiotics, other medicines, all sorts of stuff, vaccines. A lot of it based on plants, but not all of it. A lot of it from synthetic chemistry. Green Revolution, 1950s and 1970s. I'll get into that later. It is very important if you want to understand how there's enough food on the planet. Genetic Revolution, 1980s. Useful for people interested in the modern medicines like Genentech era. Transgenic plants, Monsanto. All sorts of advancements in medicine. It's just so much better over the past 100 years. It's a long way. And there's organizations like the NIH, which gives $30 billion a year to research. The FDA, which doesn't have a huge budget, but it's very influential. USDA, likewise. USAMRIID, which does a lot of toward vaccine research and possibly offensive biotech research as well. And nonprofits for trying to cure diseases and whatnot. About pharmaceuticals, many come from plants, discovered by accident, trial and error. Sometimes we don't even know how they work to today. Synthetic chemistry is how all these were discovered, and that's a byproduct of alchemy, actually, of all chemistry, especially synthetic chemistry. Some early medicines were actually fabric dyes or extracts of plants or animal body parts, like insulin came from the pancreas extract of a pig, or if you were kosher, another animal. The FDA and USDA are very interesting organizations from an economics, public safety, social justice perspective. But it's very complicated. If you'd like your opinion on it, just ask me some other time. It's green evolution. It's basically a bunch of R&D and liberal tech transfer to the third world to increase agriculture production. In the 1940s and 1970s. So due to surge in global population after World War II, it's a conservative estimate that the Green Revolution, a term coined by USAID in 1968, saved over 1 billion humans from starvation. Because it's like irrigation, crop management techniques, hybrid seeds, synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, Monsanto era technology. Hybridized seeds are like for wheat and corn, but they're not the Monsanto seeds. They're not, they don't turn their genes. They're not, you get away for free. Hybridized seeds aren't exactly like, sometimes they're biotech, but to a certain point they were just the good seeds. And they're important for grains, but that was the emphasis of the Green Revolution, not for like broccoli, for like wheat, corn, rice. And with these standardized seeds came genetic monoculture, some biodiversity risk, and arguably human allergies to certain foods. And it's complicating to take a generation or two to show up, but these things exist. Ag tech in the 60s was impressive. They did some genetic engineering actually in the late 60s, and it's a crowning achievement by the USDA, the UN, USAID, and the universities, saved over 1 billion people from starvation. So back to the biotech revolution. So I talked about green revolution. Biotech was 1978 onward. Genetic revolution, the Genome Project, recombinant DNA and PCR, faster, cheaper sequencing. It's foundational for genetic biology. And then there's things like 23andMe, which for those single nucleotide polymorphisms to tell you what your risk may be for a disease, but it's all guesswork. Lots of modern medicines came out of biotech, maybe 100 different medicines. The ones that fight cancer without the chemotherapy effects, that's this stuff, the Genentech stuff. They also made insulin, and they're sometimes safer, often safer. It's been a transition in synthetic chemistry. If you're interested, I'll put the slides online. Dark side of biotech is obviously biowarfare. I don't have time to list everything. You can look on Wikipedia, but bacteria, viruses, amoebas, parasites, fungus, all being weaponized, targeting inflammation, allergies, toxins, infections. Contagions always a factor. I mean, the movie was decent, I guess, but basically, the idea is how contagious is the agent. The toxin is not contagious at all, but other stuff is virulent. Health and Human Services has a list of select agents and toxins, which are their, watch out, these are bioweapons things. Botulism, bacteria, toxins, black plague, etc. I'm not going to pronounce all these, but basically stuff from anthrax and cholera to C. diff and salmonella, which you get at the hospital. Clearly, you can incapacitate an army or entire country with those weaponized bacteria, and that was just bacteria, not viruses. Don't know too much about viruses, but scary ones are smallpox, meningitis, encephalitis, and of course, the most scary of all, Like that movie Outbreak, viral hemorrhagic fevers like Ebola. And there's several of those viruses, but they don't spread much because they kill so fast. There is one weaponized fungus, the military calls it OC, Latin name, whatever this is. It's actually from Southwest USA and North Mexico. It has a disease called Valley Fever. I've actually heard about it in the news every once in a while. Didn't realize it's classified as a bioweapon by the military. It sounds pretty bad. It's virus level 3, so that same category is West Nile, SARS, rabies. BSL-4 is the highest, and for definitely Ebola and smallpox.
So what can we do to protect ourselves?
I'll try and get to that in the editing Q&A. I don't think I put a good slide on that. Some really cool tech that's kind of related. DNA computing, physical experiments for early stages. DNA and bio-nanotechnology using DNA as a material, like molecular scaffold for nanotech, not just for storing information. This is used for new nanotechnology for cancer. That's actually in the clinical trial stages. It's very promising. Natural computing, bio-inspired designs includes a lot of things that apply to computer security. I could have given a talk on just this. You could give a course on this. You could write a book on this list of topics if you go in depth enough. Especially if you include the math, you could have one book on each. So evolutionary algorithms, neural networks, swarm intelligence, artificial immune systems, fractal geometry, artificial life. Now some of these are used in computer security, some of these are used in other aspects of programming. Quantum computing, which is in the early stages. Membrane computing, which is right now just theoretical and doesn't mean much. And DNA molecular computing as well, which is kind of proof of concept. And material science and engineering is very closely related to synthetic biology because, if you're making stuff like a spider silk, how do you get that raw protein spider silk to be like a vest polymer matrix type thing? I don't know much about material science and engineering, but obviously you need people from all sorts of disciplines to work together or synthetic biology to work. Obviously lots of slides. I'm not going to talk about all the advances in medicine, like robots and nanotech. I'm going to keep it on biohacking, hopefully, maybe. I'll take a break, or I can answer any questions so far. Maybe I'll answer the how to protect yourself question. I mean, I don't know. Or I can just power through the slides and get over with.
Well, for you, do you know what you want to eat? What did you order?
I didn't look at the menu. Did you order plate?
That's on the menus.
Yeah, I might.
Wait, they have pancakes?
I'm gonna
pancakes?
I might eat later.
They have pancakes.
Yeah, I'm gonna eat later.
Chocolate chip
But
pancakes.
see, I said nap time, but I'll try and give a brief answer, and maybe I'll expand on it later on how to protect yourself. Trust in the CDC, universities, the Army, and other countries as well to come up with solutions to all these problems due to the fact that they know they need to. Now, that doesn't mean it's not scary, but with the technology that enables the bad things, there's also technology being developed that's incredibly important and is getting the funding by FBI and DHS to circumvent, to neutralize threats. And it's very hard to make a vaccine to something that just pops up, like a new virus. Or antibiotic versus bacteria, how do you treat that? So, luckily though, the situation is not that dire.
Just because you mentioned it specifically, I'll tell you, my pulmonologist, he diagnosed me with valley fever, right? Sucks. Yeah, don't get that. Somebody here probably already has it though. If you hang out in Bakersfield or Arizona a lot, that will happen to you.
You
Like,
said it was like incapacitating, like did it?
no, like, but basically, like, I got like a really bad respiratory infection, right? And then, like,
If you were a soldier, would it make your job impossible?
probably, I
Yeah,
can really speak
so
to
as
that.
a
I've never done
bioweapon,
any
it has a
soldiering.
purpose.
Yeah, but yeah, my father-in-law, he got the same thing because he lives out in Arizona, and it turns out like there's like a fungus, like which this seems kind of weird to me, but it's a fungus that exists out in the desert, right? In desert areas.
Yeah.
And then it blows its spores all over creation. You inhale said spores, and you get valley fever.
You know what
And it rolls with you for the rest of your life. You just get sick periodically.
you know, the government would say it's a conspiracy theory, but in some cases it may be true, in other cases it's not. Some of these pathogens, you know, may have, like, that appeared after World War II, may have like been a result of bioweapon programs that just got deployed and
I don't know. Like,
and then the key one being Lyme disease.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
about valley fever, but
yeah, my pulmonologist, he was talking about it. He's saying like it's really widespread. Arizona, New Mexico, California, especially like Central California.
I mean, it
like,
could be from
like
Africa.
People just get nailed
and
constantly.
It could be from, you know, all I'm saying is that it's certainly
Okay.
possible that
True story.
just like climate change makes diseases like malaria, the territory expand, bioweapon programs will cause, you know, like potential outbreaks, and just, you know, it might not be on the news because the government's not going to admit to it.
Yeah, I read about some of the government conspiracies on the website.
Well, like Lyme
Cover
disease,
files,
a lot of people, I mean,
Should.
the Nazis like actually did experiment with ticks and put bacteria that cause Lyme disease in ticks, so Operation Paperclip and all that, like there might have been some rogue element, someone obviously doing something harmful, and the outbreak of Lyme disease was, you know, I don't know if it was near Fort Detrick, but it was in like Virginia, kind of like government area, so I don't know. Obviously the US military and, you know, DOD, DIA, CIA, all those people, they want to have bioweapons and biotoxins that are knockout agents like fentanyl gas, which is what the Russian special forces Spetsnaz used in the Moscow hostage theater crisis in 2002, where like over 100 people died, civilians actually, because the knockout gas they used, that were like 600 hostages, 100 died. The knockout gas they used was incredibly potent opiate, and obviously it's not going to be disseminated in the room evenly, so people that inhaled just a little too much of the white powder gas died from vomiting and asphyxiation. And for some reason the Russian intelligence services that run Spetsnaz didn't tell the medics to have the antidote on hand, which is the same antidote for like heroin overdose. And, you know, medics in the US have it on hand by law, I guess, to prevent people from dying. But,
So you're saying it's safe to overdose in heroin?
well, I'm saying that like, you know,
Medics will be able to help you from a heroin
I'm saying
overdose?
that like,
Most.
So as long as I
from
do
like,
heroin,
okay, tear
and I'm
gas is
concerned about overdosing,
relatively
just call
harmless.
911 first.
But like every other chemical and biological activity besides tear gas is pretty bad. Like blistering agents, mustard gas. Like, I mean, some of it's like not that bad, but some of it's really bad. But the least is pepper spray.
A lot of these recent heroin overdoses have been fentanyl. They lace the heroin with fentanyl and people use the same.
I'm not aware of like the street economy, but fentanyl's big in Russia. I think there's like that crocodile phenomenon in Russia where people using like this nasty butane, like whatever.
Their skin off.
It like it kills them essentially. But fentanyl, yeah. Look on Arrowhead for fentanyl. There's a lot of information. So obviously there's a black market, which is scary because its dosing is very intense. It's given by the microgram. It's respiratory suppressant. You know, it's heroin addict. A lot of fentanyl can easily kill themselves.
Most people, yeah, who use it without knowing it's laced, they kill themselves.
Yeah, it's big in Russia, and
Something like 100 times stronger, like per.
in Russia, they say like Putin's trying to kill all the addicts because Putin's like the man.
Do you not believe that?
Well, no, it's true. The Russian government hates their like anarchist kids and addict kids and like Pussy Riot and all that shit. So
They don't care about any of them.
they want to kill them. So crocodile and fentanyl, like actually it's a super strong brand of fentanyl that's on the streets really cheap in Russia. It kills all their addicts. But they still have lots of addicts and they still have depopulation. Because of the high alcoholism rates and just the general misery, and there's a lot of inequality in Russia. More so than China.
Never been around.
It's pretty amazing because China's pretty good. Okay, so nap time. Biohacking, since 2000, a lot has happened. I don't know if I'm going on for an hour or how long this is. I'm going to look at my
I think you have
phone.
20 minutes before an hour.
Okay, 20 minutes before an hour? Great. So I have
So you got 20 minutes to finish up. Is that good?
Yeah, and then I stay an hour. That's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few examples, list theoretical applications, go back to one slide. Remember, no stupid questions, just stupid people.
Are you calling you
Standardization in DNA programming. If you want to learn more about synthetic biology from a hacker/programmer perspective, watch this video on YouTube called it's from Chaos Computer Club. It's on their account. It's from the Congress meeting 7 years ago. It's called Programming DNA by Drew Endy. It's very easy to find by these search terms. He's a genius. He spends lots of time on a point I'm about to make very, very quickly, but he talks about all sorts of stuff synthetic biology related from a hacker perspective. Synthetic biology requires standardization, as every field of engineering production has this, and it's vital. I'm not going to go into detail, but he does, so if you're interested, watch this talk. Cool examples. Creating strain of bacteria. It lives in your gut like a probiotic from yogurt or probiotic pills. But this strain of bacteria is a synthetic organism, a genetic chimera. Thus, it has a metabolic pathway from some other species. Therefore, it's chimera, I believe. Thus, it can do something important, like produce a harmless and natural anti-inflammatory peptide. It results in some diseases like multiple sclerosis, Crohn's, lupus, cancers that go into remission. So it could also give you vitamins. It could lessen heart disease. I think this is the heart. Yeah, this is the heart disease example, which was actually a project by a university in this iGen competition. It worked on an amino acid that was involved in the formation of scar tissue in the arteries. So the symbiotic gut bacteria, like probiotic, would reduce risk of hardened arteries and heart disease. And DNA for data storage has been around, introduced by Russian scientists in '65. But in 2012, Science published research by George Church, a famous computer scientist and geneticist, with his colleagues at Harvard, in which he coded DNA with HTML draft of his book that was about 50,000 words, and 11 JPEGs, one JavaScript program. There were multiple copies for redundancy, and it was 5.5 petabits. He estimated 5.5 petabits can be stored each cubic millimeter of DNA. So DNA is actually an amazingly awesome, dense storage mechanism. I mean, petabytes, cubic centimeter, that's millimeter, cubic millimeter. That's incredible. So the problem, of course, would be synthesis of DNA. The researchers used simple code where bits were mapped one-to-one basis, which had a shortcoming that it led to long runs at the same base, the sequencing of which is error-prone. So it's difficult to actually do so far, but 10 to 20 years it'll be easier. DNA printing and DNA sequencing technology is getting cheaper and faster at a rate exceeding Moore's law, so it's incredible. Research shows that DNA can be storage medium like hard drives or magnetic tapes. and it's it's stable, especially if it's dehydrated. So contest program for bacteria, it's called iGEM. International Genetically Engineered Machines. It's a competition with around 50 teams from all over the world. Mostly undergraduate students. Sometimes they have a couple grad students. They're allowed 2 grad students each team, 8 people per team. Some high schools compete. It's cutting edge science. They do some amazing stuff. They do every step of it, and they not only write up the papers and make the theoretical argument, they actually build a proof of concept and demo it, and a lot of times their stuff works. It makes a normal science fair look incredibly inadequate and boring. These guys are genetic engineering trailblazers for their level in school. It's inspiring. And BioBricks. So iGEM works with BioBricks, a nonprofit foundation, and a wiki-type system, which is a collective of open source biological parts, which are basically snippets of DNA that we know codes for certain parts of bacterial cell or yeast. BioBricks and pretty much all synthetic biology only works with bacteria. Sometimes it's used. Synthetic biology never involves genetic engineering in animals. It just doesn't. That doesn't include synthetic biology. That's something else. This is like the only picture I included. I had a hard time finding pictures that were relevant at all, but it's an example of what a sequence of BioBricks look like. It's kind of like a circuit design. There are different categories. Here's some promoters, coding sequences, DNS, functional for domain name service, inverter, terminator, plasma backbone, which is like a fork kind of thing. I'm not going to really be able to make sense of that last slide right now, but basically just a diagram for a paper showing what it looks like. But the BioBricks they use, the sequence of it, the order of it on the plasmid, just a circle, which is, plasmid is a thing of DNA that bacteria can use, and just like take it up really easy. These things work really well with genetic engineering and computers, so this technology will advance very quickly. Similar to computers, but it's hard to say. So far, it hasn't been linear, like Moore's law, succeeding Moore's law. Its rate of growth and success seems to be non-linear, perhaps exponential as well. So, biohacking. I could say there's 3 domains of biohacking. Control, so making medicines, valuable useful chemicals, or beer in a sealed lab or vat or bioreactor at home or something. In a human, complex medical use. Gut flora is the example most people are working with. Added benefits to treat disease or extend life somehow. Health and nutrition, whatever. So those are the first 2 domains. In humans or in a controlled lab to never escape. In the wild, and this is the most dangerous in a way, even though in humans it's dangerous too. In the wild, sometimes for geoengineering, like trying to stop climate change. Like scientists were dumping a bunch of iron in the ocean to have algae go crazy and absorb a lot of carbon, but then that algae died and the carbon was stored for a little while, but then the little microscopic shrimp zooplankton ate it and they created CO2 and it kind of ended up like being a net zero. So anyway, geoengineering is releasing stuff in the wild. Sometimes it cleans pollution. It can be very effective, but you gotta be careful. It could clean up oil spills. It could even help against radiation. It can help degrade radioactivity, believe it or not. There's some bacteria powered by radioactivity, some fungus too, very interesting stuff. But in the wild, implicates sometimes for evil bioterrorism, and that's really scary stuff. So I'm not going to read all of this because I'm going to lose my voice maybe, but there's this Biopunk manifesto that's based on the Cyberpunk manifesto. And it was made by someone from the hacker community that's involved in Chaos Computer Club and CodeCon and DEF CON researchers, security researcher, focusing right now on language security is Meredith Patterson. And she's done work in biotech and bioinformatics, so she penned this Biopump Manifesto based on Cyberpunk Manifesto. And, you know, here's the first part, another part, another part, another part, another part. I'm really not going to read it, but the slides will be online, and if you guys really want, just speak up at the end and I'll go back and read it or have someone else read it. But it's, you know, pretty much, I don't think it's really worth reading right now unless you're really interested. This one's kind of cool. For some of you that have read sci-fi and heard of gray goo. Gray goo comes from nanotech, but it's, you know, as much as molecular biotechnology can be considered nanotech because it's on the nanoscale, it is a technical yet natural mechanism at the nanoscale. Gray goo could apply to bacteria or other viruses, any kind of self-assembling process. That gray goo, what it is it's something nanotech or some kind of nanoscale biotech that what it does is it consumes all matter and turns that matter into itself. It's called gray goo, and it's from science fiction, and it's like a negative thing for nanotech, kind of like a super weapon of mass destruction that could, you know, take over a planet, or I don't think it would escape a planet's atmosphere, but the idea is that everything it touched turns into itself. Imagine if you made a super bacteria that eats garbage, well, it could mutate and start eating everything and turning all biomass on Earth into itself. That's like gray goo applied to synthetic biology. But, you know, people programming things for bioremediation, which we're not close enough to release yet, they're going to be putting like maybe a dozen fail-safes. So this thing won't grow unless it has all these random amino acids or other things that are like keys. So there are all sorts of safety mechanisms that can be placed next to vital genes. So if there's a deletion or mutation, it's highly unlikely that the organism will be viable. And there are many ways to have safe and responsible synthetic biology, but unfortunately, it's easy to weaponize, and countries like China, Russia have done a lot. Japan had a notoriously amazing program that was really evil. Germany too, but not anymore. Unfortunately, Iran has a lot of biotech capacity. India, Pakistan. I don't know what they have, but you know, I kind of don't want to know. And luckily, biowarfare has some of the mutually assured destruction aspect of nuclear warfare. So that, in a game theory perspective, that results in people less likely to attack. Gray goo's unlikely. Like I said, fail safes. You know, there hasn't been any regulation yet on releasing genetically modified bacteria in the wild, so until that happens, it's not going to happen. GMO plants do have regulation in place clearly, and they are in the wild. Sometimes arguably too much, they can cause problems. Wrapping this up, much synthetic biology is just like the rest of science, but you can define it as applied genetic engineering of microbes with the mindset of a systems and or software engineer. I call it microbial engineering. After all, DNA is the code of life, so synthetic biology is all about programming DNA effectively, predictable design, systems biology, and systems engineering. There's no instruction manual, so it's all reverse engineering, and you know, therefore it is biohacking, more so than other research. There's so much more I can talk about in depth and in breadth, but due to time limits and I was trying to save my voice, it was less manageable. I decided against graphics for the most part too. I also left out many examples of projects. In reality, there have been thousands of SynBio projects in the past decade, at least 1,000, maybe thousands. Most of all, this talk is trying to explain the core premise, and give a few examples. So, any questions?
When you order DNA, that dollar a base pair you're talking about, how does that work? Do you just get a vial back full of like?
Yeah, you get a little small plastic vial with the DNA.
And what do you do with it? Like,
But there's an error rate, so they have to like print it, and then there's an error, and they snip it out, and then they stitch it together. What are you gonna say? Sorry.
I'm sorry. How do you use it? Like, how do you make it start making proteins or whatever?
Part of the genetic revolution starting in 1978 is like these restriction enzymes and things that like kind of slice DNA, and then you add something else and use PCR to take a snippet of DNA and like clone it and make lots of copies, and you put these on plasmids, and like bacteria take it up naturally. It's pretty darn easy because naturally it happens too. You know, we're like hacking the naturally occurring systems because something I didn't mention here is bacteria. There's viruses that affect only bacteria, and they're kind of helpful actually. They're not bad viruses. They're called bacteriophages, and they do horizontal gene transfer. So there's actually this like, not like an open source repository, but kind of. It's like basically they're exchanging code, all these bacteria that live in the same space through viruses. And they're like getting special qualities that will, for survival. It can be bad for like antibiotic resistance, or it can be good for like some kind of, if it's a helpful bacteria that lives in the stomach and helps to digest food, that could be good or something.
I know when they had the major oil spill down there in the
Gulf
of Mexico.
Yeah.
I know they used some sort of agent to clean up that oil, right? And like it sounded kind of similar to like a purpose-built version of the gray goo that you're talking about.
They used Corexit, which is a surfactant that's like a very advanced product of synthetic chemistry. But it's not a biological agent, but there was talk about the research of bacteria that can degrade petroleum, but it's very early stage. It's not,
So
that could be 30, 40, 50 years away.
So it wasn't a biological agent, but it was like a chemical agent that they used to like.
It could have had bad side effects. Some people said it killed fish and stuff, but it was a chemical, an advanced synthetic chemical that's like a surfactant, like a soap that causes things to bubble up, make small bubbles.
So did they just make the oil more containable with that by like changing its form, or did they actually?
You have a good point that I'm not. Maybe you're thinking of this. Forgot to mention. The Corexit, which is just a chemical, as it makes the oil slick into small bubbles, natural bacteria that already existed there actually seem to break it down. So there was actually a microbiological element in the water just already there.
So it just feeds that or acts as like a catalyst?
It helped that process because they didn't work as maximizing surface area allows them to work better. Just like the lungs has maximized surface area, and that's actually like fractal branching, like that ratio creates maximum surface area with minimum volume, and that's why our lungs are shaped like that, and trees are shaped like that. And it's like the most efficient thing. It's very, very cool how biology works like that.
Would biohacking cover like stem cell research?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I said no human stuff, and stem cells are pretty much animal or human. I said no animal, so biohacking, actually I said synthetic biology was no human, or no animals. But biohacking can definitely include humans and stem cells, growing organs, life extension of all sorts, stem cells there's adult stem cells, also known as mesenchymal stem cells, which are from your bone marrow. They can be helpful in certain things. There's embryonic stem cells, which are the most well-known, obviously controversial. It's possible they both can cause cancer, but no one knows for sure, because every cancer has a cancer stem cell, which is the root of the cancer. It's a stem cell gone bad. And you can Wikipedia cancer stem cell, and it's quite interesting actually. Every type of cancer has one. And there's different theories as to why they come about, but we have stem cells all throughout our body, even in the brain, and there's cell turnover, like the liver replaces itself every 7 years, one by one, each cell is replaced in 7 years. The lining of the intestines, at least part of the intestines, 3 days. Every 3 days it gets replaced. So pretty much every part of the body is getting regenerated on a long enough timeline, except the brain. There's some neurogenesis in the brain, and some trimming of neurons, and there's like neuroplasticity and all this interesting stuff that there's some biohacking related to that, like nootropics and brain exercises to enhance memory and cognitive ability, and neuroplasticity. There's a couple medicines that might increase neuroplasticity. In fact, there's one medicine that was discovered to give people perfect pitch. They could have been tone deaf, and they were given this medicine that was typically used for depression, and they've given it one time, and then all of a sudden they have a perfect pitch. It's very bizarre. It seems like something that could have been a placebo effect for all we know, but this placebo effect is incredibly powerful. But yeah, it's not reliable in more large scale. It's only like a small group usually, but placebo does happen. So to answer your question, biohacking can include stem cells and growing your own organs, and bone marrow transplant is a medical procedure, but it's very complicated. It's kind of like a biohacking of sorts. Yeah, what's up?
So does eugenics fall in this, or?
Oh gosh, that's a very controversial, slippery slope aspect that I didn't put in the bioethics slide, but it's definitely a core topic on bioethics of human genetics. I mentioned the Human Genome Project, but synthetic biology has nothing to do with human and animals, like I said, and I really tried to focus on synthetic biology, but in reality the talk was biohacking, so that does include humans. There are a lot of ethical dilemmas, you know, with whether it's clinical research or someone taking their own risk. It's hard to say. I mean, there's some respectable examples, like a scientist who found the cure for stomach ulcers. He was frustrated with the pace of research and confident. He drank a big culture of H. pylori, the bacteria, that at that time most scientists in the world said stomach ulcers were caused by stress and neurological and coffee and other things were causing them. And so we got surgery, it was really bad, so their stomach got removed, and it was like way worse than stomach ulcers are today. This was in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And anyway, this researcher in Australia and his academic partner, who got the Nobel Prize in Medicine eventually, like 20 years after this, one of them drank the bacteria and got sick really quickly, and then took the antibiotic combination, which is two antibiotics and bismuth, or any antacid. And bismuth's like Pepto-Bismol, and they got better. He got better really fast, and he was able to prove it. And that's actually, microbiology has this old list of requirements, 4 requirements called cautious postulates, and it's kind of annoying because you have to like have a treatment to prove that a bacteria causes disease. And in certain cases like leprosy and other things, like treatments will never work, and it might be a bacteria, but we don't have an antibiotic that works yet, or the antibiotics don't work because the host is immunocompromised, so to the point where there's resistance, or there's the immunology and clinical side of it, and the human health side is very fascinating, but it leaves the realm of synthetic biology, although in a liberal sense it is biohacking, but it's also medicine. I don't know if I answered your question.
Good enough, yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, this is a very unorthodox talk for a computer hacker group, but the bio-inspired design list I gave, there's a lot of stuff there. I'll try and put this online on the IB website, maybe. Hopefully I can get it up there. Just a PowerPoint file, or I'll plain text it too. And you can look up some of the terms, and can maybe really help you with the project, some code, certain algorithms that are, there's a lot of hacker and IT and programming related stuff in here. You just have to kind of look at some specifics and see the connection, which is pretty clear. Wikipedia will explain, especially the bio-inspired design. So just Wikipedia those terms, and you can learn a lot about engineering and programming and reverse engineering. Yeah, Wikipedia has pretty good articles that are primers on these topics. Yeah, I'll put the slides online, and any more questions? Will my voice gets a break? Awesome. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you very much.